In our first videos, we covered the internal acts of the virtue of religion: devotion, prayer. Devotion is having the will to do things for God, to give Him honor, and to order our life to Him. Prayer is the lifting of our mind to God, and we see St. Thomas explain the Our Father. These are internal acts of the virtue of religion because they involve things that primarily remain within us, our mind and our will. So now we are prepared to discuss the external acts of the virtue of religion. And it's important to note right off the bat that St. Thomas states that in order for these external acts to be acts of the virtue of religion, they must arise from and be accompanied by the internal acts of the virtue of religion. For example, if there's a person who genuflects in front of the tabernacle, and genuflecting is an external act of worship, but interiorly their motive or their intention is to show off to someone, then they are not performing an act of the virtue of religion, but an act of vainglory. Our internal disposition, our internal intentions shape and give character and understanding to our external actions. So it is our internal disposition of worship, of giving honor to God and directing our life to Him, that makes our external actions morally fruitful. St. Thomas distinguishes three main types of external actions of religion. The first type is adoration, whereby we use our body to reverence God. The second is when things are physically offered to God. The third is when things are received from God. So, adoration, giving to God, and receiving from God. In this video, we will discuss adoration, the first type, using our body to worship God. Bodily adoration includes any action or gesture that we do which arises from interior worship and devotion, such as genuflecting, bowing, singing, making the sign of the cross, holding our hands in a certain way, or lifting our arms, or prostrating on the ground. But why do we use our bodies to worship God? Christ, for example, says in the Gospel of John that we should worship in spirit. So why should we have rituals or definite physical actions? St. Thomas places a very high value on our physical nature. This is a classic Dominican trait, since the order was founded to combat a heresy, Albigensianism, which denied the goodness of physical creation. For St. Thomas, we are not just souls that happen to occupy or move bodies. I am not my soul, and my soul is not me. But rather I am a single being, a single substance, a single reality that includes both body and soul. St. Thomas says, therefore, that, quote, the body and the soul make up one single being. So St. Thomas argues that God doesn't want just a part of ourself to worship Him, but He wants our whole reality. He wants not just our spirit, but our body. St. Thomas says, therefore, that, quote, we offer both spiritual and bodily acts of homage. Our interior acts of worship should give rise to external acts of worship, using the body that God gave us. St. Paul even says, glorify God in your body. Ritual actions and gestures, therefore, are the means by which we are able to express our interior worship of God, just as written letters and spoken words express our interior thoughts. And while we can make acts of worship anywhere, St. Thomas thinks that there is a certain fittingness to being able to perform them in a specific, definite place, like a church. It isn't that God is enclosed in a single place, and we have to go specifically there to find him. We hear many people, for example, say, well, why should I have to go to church? I can go out in the woods for a hike and meet God there. Well, that's true, but St. Thomas gives 3 reasons why it is fitting to worship God in a specific place. The first is that when we know that a building or a place is specifically set aside for God, it should help us in our worship of God. For example, museums are set up specifically to hold works of art. We go to the museum specifically so that we can engage and look at art. In a similar way, when we have designated places like churches, which are beautiful, it should help us to worship God, because we know that it is there for the purpose of God. The second reason is that while we can worship God when we go hiking, we cannot celebrate Mass when we're hiking. And this is because Mass and other important rites of the Church require very specific stationary objects, like an altar or places to sit. We go to a church to worship because it is in there that we can celebrate the sacred mysteries of our faith. Third, because we are social beings, we are affected by those who are around us. Think, for example, of the energy of a football stadium. Seeing tens of thousands of people, hearing them cheer, draws you into the excitement of watching the game. In a similar way, going to a church where other people are gathered should help us be drawn more into the action of worship, the action of ordering our life to God. Christ says, therefore, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. Our social reality is an important aspect in our ability to worship God. Our interior worship of God can be expressed in a number of ways, and this is fitting to our physical nature. And while we can worship God anywhere, there is a certain beauty and a certain fittingness to worshiping him in a place set aside specifically for worship. So adoration is the first type of external act of the virtue of religion, using our bodies to worship God. In our next videos, we will discuss the giving of things to God, the second type of the external acts of the virtue of religion. Virgo Maria.